The morning sun climbed slow and golden over the ridge of the Superstition Mountains, painting the desert in warm hues of copper and rose. A thin veil of mist hovered over the brush, not quite touching the sand, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Lone hawk drifted silently above the saguaro cacti, scanning the ground below. In the quiet, broken only by the wind weaving through mesquite trees, the land seemed to hum with memories. Chief Tazhi rose with the light, just as he had every day since he left the warpath. His long black hair, now streaked with threads of gray, was tied behind his back. His chest was bare to the morning air, broad and scarred, a map of a life few in the town dared ask about. But here, on the patch of earth he called home, 3 miles outside of Canyon Hollow, he was no longer a symbol of battle. He was a husband, a father, a man who had chosen peace, though it never came without price. Their homestead sat on a gentle slope that caught the morning sun just right, with a one-room adobe hut built by his own hands and the hands of his wife, Alosia. Smoke curled from the fire pit outside, where she prepared blue corn cakes and mesquite tea. Her hands moved with grace, a rhythm passed down from her mother and her mother before that, as steady as the desert winds. Nakai, their son, no more than 8 winters old, burst from the hut barefoot, his laughter ringing like a creek after rain. "Father," he called, a small bundle of sticks in his arms, "I found a new spot for the rabbit traps. By the arroyo bend. I saw Prince." Tazhi bent to inspect the boy's finds. His voice was low and warm. "Did you check for scent trails? A rabbit will not come where a coyote has passed." "I did," Nakai said proudly, lifting his chin. "No coyote. Just rabbit and deer, maybe. Tiny hoof marks." Tazhi nodded, a ghost of a smile at his lips. He placed a firm hand on his son's head, ruffling his dark hair. "Good. Your eyes grow sharper." Alosia watched them from the fire, her heart full and heavy at once. She had known Tazhi before he had put away the war paint. She had stitched wounds, hidden from cavalry patrols, buried friends. She had followed him into exile when the U.S. Army came to burn villages and take children, but none of it had broken them. Not the hunger, not the hate. What broke people, she had come to believe, was when they stopped believing they could live different. And that was what they had here, different. Not safer, always, but different. Their home was surrounded by hand-planted agave and aloe, dried chili strings hanging from the side of the house. A small corral with 2 burrows stood nearby, and beyond that, the long shadows of cacti reaching like arms toward the sun. The air smelled of earth and spice and cedar smoke. Tazhi spent the morning sharpening his old obsidian blades, though he mostly hunted now with a weathered rifle gifted to him by Elias Rowe, the town storekeeper. Elias was one of the few white men in Canyon Hollow who treated him with more than stiff politeness. Tazhi remembered the day Elias's son fell from a wagon and broke his arm. It had been Alosia's paste of juniper resin and wild sage that drew out infection and saved the boy. Since then, Elias had nodded deeper, spoken slower, even invited Tazhi to share a drink once on his porch. Tazhi never drank it, but he sat. And that was enough. Still, others in town looked at him and saw only the past. Saw the Apache first, not the man. Tazhi felt it in every wary glance when he rode into town. He had once been called Ghost Walker, a name whispered with dread by soldiers and settlers alike. And now he was chief in name only. No war party, no tribe. Just a man with calloused hands, and a son who deserved more than the shadows of old wars. He watched as Alosia washed herbs in the water basin, her long braid catching the sun, her wrists strong and weathered. She paused, sensing his gaze. "You'll leave today?" He nodded. "The deer move before the heat comes. I'll go past 3 sister rocks, circle down near Dry Creek. 3 days, 4 if the wind turns." "Be careful," she said. It was not a request. It was a ritual, one they both obeyed. "I'll bring back meat. And a new story." he said, looking at Nakai. The boy grinned wide, then made a face. Not like the last one, with the talking coyote. That one was boring. Tazhi chuckled, deep and soft. Then I'll find one better. They packed light. Dried meat, canteen, flint, and his father's old bone knife. As he secured his bedroll and slung the rifle over his shoulder, he paused near the edge of their land. From this rise, you could see the distant shapes of Canyon Hollow, the spire of the church, the tops of roofs, the faint dust trail from wagons. He narrowed his eyes. Something in the air had shifted. The wind brought with it not just dust and scent, but unease. He'd learned long ago to listen when the land whispered. Down in the town, the whispers had already begun. Morris Griggs arrived in Canyon Hollow less than a month ago, trailing stories like flies. He wore a battered Confederate coat and a permanent sneer. Claimed he was owed land, respect, and justice. Said he'd fought for states' rights, though everyone knew he mostly fought for his own. He brought with him a group of men, drifters and bounty chasers, who drank loud and walked like they owned the ground. The old sheriff had left town sick, and the town council had ridden north for a territorial meeting, leaving a void. Griggs stepped into it like a vulture finding a corpse. He started calling himself acting sheriff. No vote, no badge, just a voice louder than others, a gun always close, and the kind of arrogance that convinced weaker men to nod along. He looked at the native homestead like it was an insult carved into the dirt, and he spoke often, over whiskey and smoke, about cleansing the land and setting things straight. No one had dared confront him yet, but many feared what would happen when he did more than talk. Elias Rowe didn't like the way Griggs asked questions about the Injun camp outside town. Didn't like the way his men laughed when they passed the Bell family's schoolhouse, where Martha taught with one hand on a ruler and the other on a shotgun. Man like that doesn't plant roots, Elias muttered one night. He digs holes. That afternoon, as Tazhi walked toward the edge of his land, ready to begin his hunt, he paused once more. His gaze swept the desert, every stone, every bend, every stillness. He placed his hand on the soil, whispering words in his tongue, not for magic, but for clarity. The wind answered with silence. He turned to Nakai. Be strong. Help your mother. Stay out of the town. Nakai nodded, though his eyes clouded with worry. Alozia said nothing, but she stood close, watching his silhouette grow smaller against the fading sun until it vanished into the red distance. That night, as coyotes yipped in the far-off hills and a strange silence settled over Canyon Hollow, Alozia lit a small fire and kept her son close. The wind that had once carried Tazhi's stories felt different now. It whispered not of legends or old spirits. It whispered of danger, and something that sounded like a warning. The morning light filtered through the cloth-curtained window, soft and yellow. Alozia stood near the fire pit, stirring a pot of wild herbs, her eyes distant and unreadable. Nakai sat on a worn wooden stool, fidgeting with a broken arrowhead. The hut was silent but not peaceful. The air held a weight, thick and unmoving, the kind of silence that presses on the chest. Alozia didn't speak it aloud, but she had felt it in her bones since the night before. Something was wrong. By midday, 2 riders approached the homestead. Nakai saw them first. He ran to the edge of the property, climbing up the low ridge where his father often kept watch. The dust cloud trailing behind the horses moved like a storm. He squinted against the glare and saw 2 figures. Both white men, both armed. He didn't recognize them. They weren't from town. He ran back fast. Alozia met him halfway, her body tense, her hair braided tight against the wind. She didn't ask what he saw. She already knew. The riders didn't stop at the edge. They rode straight through the brush, into the clearing, as if the boundary meant nothing. One of them was tall and pale, his beard scraggly and eyes sharp like a hawk's. The other was thick-chested with a crooked jaw and wore a red kerchief that had never seen a wash. "Morning, ma'am," the taller one said, reining his horse to a stop. His voice was too friendly, like a smile hiding broken teeth. "We're looking for the head of this household." Alozia stepped forward, shielding Nakai behind her. "My husband is away." "Hunting." "Shame," the crooked jaw one muttered, his eyes scanning the yard. "We were told there was a trespassing claim filed here." "There is no claim," she replied, voice flat. "This land is ours. My husband traded with Elias Rowe for its use 2 winters ago." "We got paperwork," said the tall one. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a rolled parchment. It had stamps, signatures, and the seal of a long-dissolved land company. A forgery, but a convincing one. "We'll need you to come into town. Sheriff Griggs will clear it all up." "I don't recognize that name." "He's the law now." Alozia didn't move, her shoulders tightened. Her gaze did not flinch. Nakai clutched her hand. "Best not to resist," the crooked jaw one said, touching the butt of his pistol. "Wouldn't want this to get ugly." Alozia made no sound. She stepped forward slowly and placed her hands out. She would not fight with her son beside her. They tied her wrists, gently at first, but not without arrogance. They grabbed Nakai roughly. He shouted, struggling, but one of them gripped his arm hard, yanking him toward the horse. "Let him go," Alozia said. "He is a child. You want to talk to Griggs, you both come." And with that, they were mounted. They didn't wait for her footing. They didn't care that she stumbled. Nakai wept quietly into her side. And the desert swallowed their tracks in the wind. Canyon Hollow was different that day. The usual rhythm was off. The blacksmith's hammer paused between strikes. Martha Bell noticed it first. The silence, the eyes that wouldn't meet hers, the way people stepped off the road when riders passed. They brought Alozia and Nakai into town just past noon. Not into the jail, but into the center square, where a crude platform had been hastily built from wagon planks and barn scrap. 2 poles stood like gallows, and between them a heavy wooden beam had been nailed together. From the beam, 2 lengths of rope dangled. Not to hang, but to bind. Morris Griggs stood beneath it all, arms crossed, the sun bouncing off the metal of the revolver at his side. He wore no badge. He didn't need one. He had fear. "Bind him," he said as soon as the riders dismounted. "No!" Nakai screamed as they pulled him away from his mother. "Let go of her!" They tied Alozia's wrists above her head, the rope coarse and cruel against her skin. Nakai fought until a hand struck him across the face, knocking him to the ground. "Stop it!" she shouted. Griggs stepped forward and crouched in front of the boy. "You'll behave," he said coldly. "Or I'll teach you what happens to mongrel spawn." He stood and motioned to a man in the crowd. "Bring the signs." 2 wooden boards, crudely painted, were placed around their necks. On each was a black mark, $5. The boy's sign hung low, almost too big for his small frame. Griggs turned to the gathering townspeople, his voice raised. "Let it be known, these 2 were caught trespassing on land they had no right to. This town can't tolerate thieves, can't tolerate liars, can't tolerate savages pretending to be settlers." Some in the crowd mumbled, some nodded, others looked away. Elias Rowe stood at the edge of the square, his fists clenched. He had heard about the riders. Too late. He had ridden out, seen the broken door of the homestead, the scattered herbs, the footprints. But by then, the damage was done. He stepped forward now. "This ain't justice, Griggs." Griggs turned his head slowly. "You say something, storekeep?" "I said this ain't justice. That land was given fair. My hand and Tazhi's. And this mockery, this ain't a court." Griggs smirked. "Your deal wasn't legal, ain't no record of it, and you ain't sheriff." "Neither are you," Elias snapped. Griggs drew his pistol and pointed it lazily in Elias's direction. "Difference is, I got what makes people listen." Elias stared, long and hard, before stepping back into the crowd. The afternoon wore on. Children passed by and stared. Women whispered. Some men laughed. A few drank. Nakai sagged against his bindings. Alazia's feet bled from standing too long on the rough platform. No one came to help. Not yet. That night, Elias went to Martha Bell's home. "We can't let this stand," he said. "We just can't." Martha stared at him, her eyes filled with a fury barely restrained. "You think I'm not trying? I've written 3 letters. The council. The capital. But no one's here. They left this town open, and he's crawling through it like rot. We need voices, not just words. We need to stand together. And be next? He'll hang us next time. Or worse." Elias looked away. "I saw the boy, Nakai. He didn't cry for help. He just looked at me, like he knew I wouldn't do a damn thing." Martha's hands trembled as she poured coffee. "Tomorrow," she said quietly. "We'll speak tomorrow." In the square, Alosia did not sleep. Her body ached. Her arms were numb. Nakai whimpered softly in his sleep beside her, his head resting awkwardly against the pole. She looked up at the stars. They were clear, sharp, and cold. She whispered her husband's name. Somewhere out in the desert, Tazhi paused. The deer trail he followed had vanished into a canyon, the tracks lost under a fallen tree. The wind carried no sound, but something tugged at him. Not fear, something worse. He set down his pack and placed a palm to the ground. The earth was still. But something inside him was not. He did not sleep that night. He broke camp early, long before dawn, and began the long walk home. Behind him, the Red Canyon walls echoed only silence. Ahead of him, the wind grew louder. And in it, though faint, a whisper. Not words, not voices, but the kind of silence that told a man his world was no longer safe, and his family was no longer waiting. The sun rose behind a thin veil of morning haze, casting a dusty orange glow over the empty trail that wound toward Canyon Hollow. Tazhi moved quickly, but not carelessly. His eyes swept the terrain like a hawk, scanning the earth for signs, his mind sharpened by instinct more than reason. Something was wrong, and though the desert gave no answers, his heart beat with certainty. With each step, he thought of Nakai's voice, Alosia's touch, the warmth of their fire. All of it felt distant now. There was a silence in the wind that did not belong. When he reached the ridge just south of their homestead, the feeling turned to confirmation. The gate was ajar. One of the burrows was missing, the smoke pit cold. No fresh footprints but his own. He crouched beside the garden. Plants trampled, herbal jars smashed on the porch, and the door, open, not broken, but forced in a way that bore no urgency, a hand that didn't need to rush. Tazhi closed his eyes and ran his fingers across the threshold. He smelled sweat, leather, gun oil, not his, not Alosia's. His hands tightened slowly, the bone white of his knuckles showing through his skin. He rose without a word, picked up his rifle, and turned toward Canyon Hollow. The path was dry, his steps sure. Near the edge of town, where the chaparral gave way to crooked fence posts and split-rail gates, he slowed. Canyon Hollow lay ahead, its one dusty main street already stirring. Smoke from breakfast fires rose into the early sky. But the air didn't smell right. It didn't smell of cooking or wood or cattle. It smelled like something burning on the inside. He passed the general store and saw Elias Rowe standing by the barrels out front. The older man froze when he saw Tazhi. Their eyes locked. Elias took a step forward, then stopped himself, glancing around. Tazhi didn't speak. He didn't need to. Elias looked down. His voice cracked when he spoke. "They're at the square. Since yesterday." Tazhi's breath slowed. His jaw tightened. "They tied him up, like livestock. Griggs had signs made. Mock auction. Said they were trespassers." Tazhi's eyes didn't blink. "Where?" Elias gestured with a small tilt of his chin. Tazhi walked on. He passed the church, where Preacher Daniel stood on the steps, wringing his hands and muttering something about justice and fear. He passed the blacksmith's, where the hammering had stopped. He passed the saloon, where shutters creaked open as he moved past. Every eye turned. Every whisper followed. The square opened in front of him like a wound. There they were, his son, his wife, bound to the post, skin red from sun, clothes dusty and torn, signs slung around their necks, obscene and heavy. Nakai hung limp, his head low, but Tazhi could see his chest rise with each breath. Alocia's eyes opened when she heard the hush sweep the square. Her head turned, and then she saw him. For 1 second, no one moved. Then Tazhi stepped forward. He said nothing. No cry, no shout, no war chant, just silence. And in that silence, even the wind held its breath. Morris Griggs stood near the platform, one boot propped on a crate, arms crossed, gun at his hip. His expression twisted slowly into a smirk. "Well, well. Thought maybe you'd show up. Missed your woman and your half-breed boy? Should have kept a better watch, Chief." Tazhi's eyes didn't move from his wife. Griggs stepped forward. "Now hold on there. You walk any closer and my men get nervous. You make 'em nervous, and someone gets shot. Maybe it's the squaw, maybe the pup, maybe you." Still, Tazhi said nothing. He walked until he reached the base of the platform. He set down his rifle slowly. Then, from his side, he untied a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside it, he carried the last 2 remnants of a life the desert had buried years ago, his bone-handled blade and his eagle feather headdress. He laid them both on the dirt before him. He raised his hands. "I came to trade." Griggs blinked, confused. Tazhi's voice was steady, deep, each word a drumbeat. "You want $5. You have signs. 2 of them, $5 each." You reached into his pouch and removed $10. 5 gold coins earned from weeks of skin trades and game brought to town. He let them fall into the dust. "I pay for their freedom. You take me instead." The square was silent. A murmur rose from the back. "What'd he say? He's trading himself?" "No damn way." Griggs laughed. "You serious? You want to wear the tag? Stand in the sun? Be my little auction prize?" Tazhi didn't blink. "I am the father. I am the husband. They are not your enemy. I was once. Take me." Griggs turned to the crowd, gesturing with a mocking bow. "Would you look at that? The proud warrior come begging. The ghost walker offering his own neck like a lamb." A few men chuckled. Alosia stared down at Tazhi, her throat too tight to speak. Griggs turned to his men. "Go ahead. Untie him. Let's make a trade. Why not? Give the man what he wants." The crowd shifted. Elias pushed forward. "You can't." Griggs pointed at him. "Shut your mouth, storekeep. You want to turn on the post?" The men moved, rough hands tugging at ropes. The guy cried out as they dragged the sign off him. Alosia stumbled, her legs weak. Tazhi stepped forward to catch her, but Griggs raised a hand. "Not yet. You get up there first, Chief." Tazhi obeyed. He climbed the platform slowly, standing where his wife had stood. The men fastened the rope around his wrists. The sign went over his chest. The old headdress lay in the dirt behind him. Griggs stepped back, admiring the image. "Now that," he said, "is a fine sight. Look at this town now. Look how far we've come. Tamed the wild man, made him civil." He turned toward the people. "Who wants to start the bidding?" No one answered. Griggs looked around. "Well?" Still, no one spoke. He pointed at a rancher near the front. "What about you, Harlan? You need another set of hands. This one's strong, quiet, won't talk back." The man stepped back, shaking his head. "This ain't right." "What'd you say?" "I said this ain't right, Griggs." Murmurs echoed. A woman's voice rang out. "He saved my son's life. His wife gave him herbs when the fever came." Another voice. "Tazhi found my cattle when they ran off last spring. Wouldn't take payment. I've traded with him. He never stole a thing. Let him down." Griggs's face reddened. "All of you shut up." But the crowd grew louder. Preacher Daniel stepped forward. "This is not justice. This is evil. No book of God blesses this." "Back off, preacher." "I will not." Griggs reached for his gun, but Elias was already moving. He leapt onto the platform, hands raised. "Enough! You're not the law. You never were." Griggs grabbed his collar. "I'll shoot you right here." And then came the click. Dozens of guns raised, not from Griggs's men, but from townsfolk. Rifles from porches, pistols from holsters, women with shotguns, old men with shaky hands. "You want to shoot?" Elias said. "Try, but you won't leave this square breathing." Griggs looked around and saw what he hadn't expected. A town no longer afraid. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. "Untie him!" No one moved. Griggs shouted, "I said untie him!" Still silence, until Martha Bell stepped onto the platform. She walked slowly, carefully, and pulled the knot loose from Tazhi's wrists. The sign dropped to the floor. Tazhi stepped down. He did not speak. He picked up his blade, then his headdress. He turned to his wife and son, embraced them both. The square stood still. Griggs backed away. "I'll remember this," he spat. Elias stepped forward. "No, you won't, because you're leaving. Now, or we drag you out." Griggs's lip curled, but he knew. He turned, muttered to his men, and walked out of Canyon Hollow. No one followed. No one needed to. Tazhi stood in the center of the square, his son in his arms, his wife beside him. The signs lay broken at his feet, and in that silence, something old died, and something new began. The dust from Griggs's boots still lingered in the air long after he and his riders disappeared beyond the edge of Canyon Hollow. The townspeople remained standing in the square, silent now, as if unsure what they had just witnessed. Some held rifles still raised. Some had dropped them to their sides, but all eyes turned to Tazhi, who stood there with Alozia and Nakai, their arms wrapped around one another, a family pulled from the edge of something unspeakable. No one knew what to do next. The signs with the $5 marks lay crumpled on the ground, splintered underfoot. The rope hung loosely from the beam, swaying in the light breeze, creaking with each movement like a memory refusing to be forgotten. Elias Rowe stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "You'll come with me," he said to Tazhi. "You and your family, at least for tonight." Tazhi shook his head. "We have our home." "It was torn up," Elias said. "I saw it. The door's broken, roof's kicked in, food's gone. You can't stay out there. Not tonight." Tazhi looked at Alozia. She nodded faintly. Nakai, still clinging to her side, murmured, "I don't want to go back yet." Tazhi hesitated, then finally placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. One night, together they left the square, the townspeople parting to let them pass. Some nodded respectfully. Others simply lowered their eyes in shame. And a few, just a few, watched with something like understanding, as though the last hour had peeled a veil from their faces they didn't know was there. They arrived at Elias's home by sundown. His wife, Margaret, had already prepared a stew. She didn't ask questions. She only pressed warm cloths into Alozia's hands and led Nakai to the wash basin. The boy's hands were trembling, his lips split. But when Margaret handed him a cup of sweetened tea, he took it without a word, drinking it in silence beside the fire. Alozia cleaned her wounds in private, refusing help. Her wrists were raw and red, the skin torn in places. She said nothing as she treated them, just worked with method and muscle memory, her mind elsewhere. Tazhi sat outside on the porch, watching the last of the light drain from the desert horizon. Elias joined him. "That man should have been hanged," Elias said. "He walked," Tazhi replied. "Only this time." Tazhi said nothing. Elias leaned forward, elbows on knees. "He won't be back." "He will," Tazhi said. "Men like him don't leave. They wait, they fester. And we'll be ready." "No," Tazhi turned to him. "I don't want ready. I want peace." Elias laughed, bitter. "You think peace holds after this? After what he did?" Tazhi looked back at the horizon. It must. The next morning, the town gathered in the church, not for worship, but for reckoning. Preacher Daniel stood at the pulpit, voice shaking, not from fear, but from conviction. We were silent, all of us. We watched that family get tied up like animals. And we let it happen because we were afraid. Because we told ourselves it wasn't our fight. Because we thought someone else would stop it. No one interrupted him. And then we saw what justice looked like. We saw it in a man who laid down his weapons. We saw it in a child who didn't cry. We saw it in a woman who stood taller in silence than any of us with words. He turned and faced the crowd fully. Are we a town that lets hatred wear a badge? Or are we better than that? There were murmurs. Then, a voice from the back. Then, let's make it right. They voted that afternoon. Griggs was officially declared an outlaw, his false authority revoked by formal record. His name struck from any register. If he returned, he'd be arrested on sight. A temporary council was formed, made up of those who had spoken out. Elias, Martha Bell, 2 ranchers, and Preacher Daniel. Tazhi was offered a seat. He declined. But he stood outside during the proceedings, arms crossed, a quiet presence like the mountain shadow. Nakai played near the well with 2 boys from the schoolhouse. For the first time, no one pulled their children away from him. Martha Bell approached Alozia later that day. I know what he did, she said quietly. To you, to your boy. And I know sorry don't fix it. But I want you to know, I'll teach him, your son, if you want, at the schoolhouse. Alozia's eyes softened. She looked at Nakai, then back to Martha. Yes, she said, he wants to learn. He'll be safe. I'll hold you to that. The next day, they returned to the homestead. Neighbors arrived in wagons. Men and women carrying wood, tools, fresh bread, seeds, nails. No speeches were made. No apologies offered. Only hands lifted to repair the door, to patch the roof, to rebuild the shelves smashed in anger. One man brought lumber from his barn. Another fixed the corral gate. A young girl planted flowers under the window. Tazhi watched it all with silent gratitude. When it was done and the sun dipped behind the rocks, the townspeople left, one by one, without ceremony. Just nods. A few smiles. An old woman left a loaf of bread on the porch without saying a word. That night, under a sky littered with stars, Tazhi lit a small fire and sat with Alozia and Nakai around it. Nakai looked up. Are they still out there? Tazhi nodded. Yes. Will they come back? Maybe. Alozia placed her hand on her son's shoulder. But we are not afraid. Nakai looked into the flames. I wasn't afraid when I saw you. Tazhi turned to him. You were brave. I thought you wouldn't come. I always come. Nakai's voice dropped. They hurt Mama. Tazhi looked into his son's eyes, then reached into his satchel and pulled out a smooth stone. He handed it to him. This is from Dry Creek. I found it before I turned back. Nakai ran his fingers over the surface. It's warm, because the sun touched it. Even stones can carry warmth when they've known light. Alozia smiled faintly. Like us. Later that week, the signs used in the mock auction were burned in the center of the square. Not with fanfare, but with quiet resolve. Preacher Daniel spoke a prayer. Elias poured oil. Martha struck the match. The wood flamed fast, symbols of cruelty turning to ash. Tazhi didn't attend the burning. He didn't need to. The fire wasn't his to light. Instead, he stood on the ridge above town, watching from a distance, arms folded across his chest. Alozia joined him, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. It's done, she said. No, he replied. It's begun. Below them, Canyon Hollow looked no different, but something had changed. Not just in the people, in the air. As though the land itself had breathed out, releasing something it had held too long. A new wind stirred the dust. And this time it did not whisper warnings. It whispered hope. The late summer rains had come early that year, softening the desert earth and leaving behind a scent of sage and promise. The arroyos, usually dry and cracked, trickled with shallow water that reflected the light like broken glass. Tazhi stood barefoot near the garden bed where Alozia knelt, her hands deep in the soil. Nakai chased lizards between the rows, his laughter sharper now, no longer laced with the shadows of the square. Life had not returned to normal, because there was no going back to what was, but it had settled into something honest, something unshakable. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the burning of the signs in Canyon Hollow. The townspeople didn't speak of that day much, not because they wanted to forget it, but because they had chosen to let their actions speak louder. Elias Rowe came every other morning now with bread and letters. Martha Bell brought new reading pages for Nakai, often staying long enough to share tea and speak of books she wanted to see in the schoolhouse. One morning, Preacher Daniel arrived with news from the northern capital, official news, stamped and sealed. Griggs had been added to the territorial wanted list, his crimes listed in black ink: impersonating an officer of law, unlawful detainment, conspiracy to defraud, and attempted incitement of racial violence. Word was, he'd fled east toward the border, hiding among mining towns too rough and too forgotten for proper law. But he was on record now, tracked, branded, no longer a shadow in the name of law, but a marked man. Tazhi took the news quietly, not with celebration, but with a nod. He never wished revenge, only that Griggs be known for what he truly was. The days that followed were not without challenge. Some in Canyon Hollow still hesitated around the homestead. A few store owners kept their distance, selling goods but offering no smiles. Not everyone's heart had changed, but enough had. Enough to shift the wind. When Nakai arrived for his first full day of school, the bell had already rung. He stood at the doorway of the one-room building, his hands gripping a worn leather pouch stitched by Alozia. Inside were only 2 items, a feather quill and a smooth black stone, both gifts from his father. Both meant to remind him that wisdom and strength often came quietly. Martha Bell opened the door with a smile. "You're right on time," she said, holding it wide. "They've been waiting." Nakai stepped in. 10 pairs of eyes turned toward him. A few of the boys looked unsure. One girl offered a shy wave. Then a tall boy at the back scooted sideways on his bench. "You can sit here," he said. Nakai looked to Martha, who nodded. He crossed the room, placed his pouch on the desk, and sat. And for the first time in his life, he began to write. Back at the homestead, Tazhi was repairing the eastern fence, reinforcing it with extra timber. Not because he feared anyone now, but because he wanted the land to hold strong for the coming season. Winter would be harder this year. The rain meant fewer desert hares, more flash floods, less steady hunting. He was preparing. He always prepared. Alozia stood nearby, arms folded, watching the clouds gather again. They moved fast these days, sweeping in over the low hills with little warning. She remembered times long ago when clouds meant hiding, when the smell of rain carried the sound of hooves and shouts. Now it meant harvest, clean water, a wash for her herbs. The fear had loosened from her chest. She turned to her husband. "The salve is nearly gone. If you find new sage root this week, we'll need it. I'll ride for it tomorrow." "Near Owl's Hollow. The soil there is rich." She nodded. "Take the rifle, just in case." "I always do." By the 3rd day of rain, the path into town had turned to deep mud. Wagons slowed, and children tracked slush into the schoolhouse. But no one complained. In fact, most welcomed it. The dry season had been long and cruel. Now the land breathed again. But one morning, after a night of thunder that rattled window panes and howled through the canyons, something new arrived. Elias came riding fast toward the homestead, not with fear, but urgency. Tazhi saw him coming and stepped out from under the awning. "They're coming tomorrow," Elias called out, reining in sharply. "From the north, councilmen, officials, lawmen." Tazhi tilted his head. "Why?" To meet you. He said nothing, only waited. They want to document what happened, the injustice, the story of it all. They want you to speak to them. At the church. Tazhi was quiet for a moment. I already spoke, that day. I know, Elias said, but now they want it written. For the courts. For the history records. Elijah stepped forward from the doorway. And what will they do with it? Make it part of the case. Make it part of the record so it doesn't vanish, so no one can say it didn't happen. Tazhi nodded. I will come. The next morning, the church was full. Not just with people from Canyon Hollow, but with visitors from farther north. Men in long coats with thick boots and satchels filled with paper and ink. A court writer with a machine that clicked like clockwork. A woman from a publishing paper out of Denver. All of them came to listen. Tazhi did not stand at the front. He did not speak from the pulpit. He sat in the pew beside Alozia and Nakai and answered every question with calm, measured words. He told the truth, not just about what Griggs had done, but about what had been allowed. The silence, the complicity, the looks, the way people saw him even when he came in peace. He did not blame the town. He described it. And that made it hit harder. Alozia spoke too, her voice steady even when recounting how Nakai had been dragged across the square. Nakai did not speak, but he sat up straight, never once looking down. By the time it ended, the hall was so quiet, even the floorboards refused to creak. Afterward, the councilman shook Tazhi's hand. The writer thanked him. The woman from Denver asked if she could someday return to write about the homestead, about his life. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. On the walk home, Nakai looked up at him. Are we famous now? Tazhi smiled faintly. No, but maybe we're finally seen. That evening, the family gathered near the fire, not because they were cold, but because it had become a place of reflection. Tazhi sharpened his old knife. Alozia ground dried berries into paste. Nakai read from a page Martha had given him. The words came slow, but clear. When he finished, he looked up. What happens next? Tazhi looked into the fire. That depends on us. Alozia leaned against his shoulder. And on those who come after. The days turned to weeks. The rains passed. The desert bloomed wildflowers along the ridge, orange and yellow bursts against red rock. One afternoon, Tazhi stood beside the medicine garden, now twice its size. He watched a pair of young men from town working the fence line without being asked. They waved when they saw him. He waved back. Inside, Alozia prepared jars for trade. Lavender oil, mesquite resin, healing salves. She no longer walked with guarded steps into town. The women there came to her now, not just for medicine, but for advice. Martha opened a second room in the schoolhouse. Nakai was the first to help her paint the walls. At the end of the season, the town gathered again, not for crisis, not for mourning, but for celebration. A new well had been dug. A harvest of apples had arrived from the eastern orchards. A child had been born. Tazhi was invited to speak. He declined again. But he stood with his family at the edge of the gathering, and when the music began and the lanterns were lit, Nakai danced with the other children beneath the strings of firelight, his feet light, his face bright. No signs, no rope, no weight, only laughter. And as the night deepened and the stars returned to their places above the desert sky, Tazhi sat with his wife, beneath the same tree where they had once buried old fear. I thought I would never see peace, he said. Alozia leaned into him. You didn't see it. You built it. He watched his son, the boy who had once stood, bound and bruised, now running freely across the dirt with no one chasing. The past still lived, etched in memory, burned into scars. But so did the future, and for the first time in a very long time, they belonged to both. In a land where silence once allowed injustice to grow, it was not violence, but dignity, sacrifice, and the quiet strength of a family that turned the tide. Chief Tazhi didn't reclaim peace through war, but through resilience, love, and the courage to stand tall, even when the world tried to break him. The scars may remain, but so does the hope. And now, the town of Canyon Hollow remembers not the man who tried to divide them, but the one who showed them how to heal. If this story moved you, and you believe in tales where love, honor, and redemption rise from the dust of the Wild West, make sure to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles. Don't miss the next powerful story waiting just beyond the horizon. Hit that subscribe button now and join us as we ride into more unforgettable legends of the frontier.